Good evening. Welcome. My name is Fabio Gigli. I'm the chair of the Japan Research Center here at SOAS. It is a great honor to chair the proceedings today for the annual Meiji Jingu Autumn Lecture. Karatachi to ubarakari soke kuratatemu kuso tokumare kushitsukuru toji. Clear away the wild roses and bitter orange thorns, so we may build a storehouse here. But you, lady who fashions combs, when nature calls, go far away. This poem from the Manyoshu collection, compiled around 759 CE, is attributed to one Imube no Obito. He likely was a provincial ritual specialist from the ancient Imube clan responsible for ritual purity, carrying the hereditary title Obito. So an English rendering of his name would be head of the Imube clan. The poem itself is comic in nature, contrasting the high-minded task of building a storehouse with the more earthy concern of keeping people from defecating in the vicinity. It is consistent with the background of the Imube as ritual technicians, not elegant courtiers, but people who dealt with material, even messy aspects of ritual life. His inclusion in Manyoshu illustrates how the anthology preserved not just courtly elegance, but also rustic and down-to-earth voices. With this, we have already entered the territory of today's lecture. You may not smell it yet, but you have literally already put your foot in it. As always, we would like to acknowledge the Meiji Jingu Intercultural Research Institute for their generous support. I'm particularly honored to welcome back to SOAS the director of the Meiji Jingu Intercultural Research Institute, Mr. Masahiro Sato, who came all the way from Tokyo to attend today's lecture. With him is Mr. Takanaga Tsuzumi. The annual lecture is always a wonderful occasion to thank the Institute, which not only sponsors this lecture, but also an annual scholarship program for 2 SOAS doctoral students studying any aspect of Japan, and an annual research grant for the academic members of the Japan Research Center. We are entering the 18th year of support, which means that 36 students have benefited from the Meiji Jingu studentship. Can we please have a round of applause? It is my great pleasure, finally, to introduce our speaker for tonight, Professor Rajyashree Pandey. Professor Pandey originally studied French literature, hard to believe, at Fergusson College, Pune University in India, before receiving a BA in Oriental Studies from the University of Oxford. She continued her itinerant academic life in the United States with an MA in Japanese Studies from Washington University, St. Louis, and from there went to Australia to do a PhD in Japanese Studies at the Australian National University in Canberra. After appointments at the University of Hawaii and La Trobe University in Melbourne, and a 2-year stint as a professor in Japanese Studies at the University of Tallinn, Estonia, she came to Goldsmith in 2007, where she currently holds the title Professor Emerita of Japanese Studies. Professor Pandey is a specialist in Japanese medieval literature, but she is a medievalist with a twist. Long before it was fashionable to queer things in academia, she thought about questions of gender, bodies, and sexuality with a particular attention to the often contradictory emotions at work: desire and disgust, lust and abjection, the shine of purity and the lure of the impure. Her first book about the poet-priest Kamo no Chome bears the title Writing and Renunciation in Medieval Japan. Her second book is called Perfumed Sleeves and Tangled Hair, Body, Woman, and Desire in Medieval Japanese Narratives. In it, Professor Pandey critiques how many modern scholars import categories like body, gender, agency, and woman into medieval Japanese texts without questioning whether those categories align with the ways of knowing in medieval Japan. One of our central contentions is that in medieval Japanese thought, the body is not conceived of in a Cartesian or anatomical sense. Rather, it is apprehended via external markers, robes, hair, scents, and other signs, instead of flesh, bone, or internal substance. Reading her work always takes you on an unexpected journey. I'm very curious to see where she will take us tonight, with a talk that is also the title of her forthcoming book, The Excremental Imagination, Disgust, Compassion, and Laughter in Medieval Japan. As always, we'll follow an academic format with 1 hour of talk followed by Q&A. Hello also for the people online. If you have burning questions, please, you can start feeding them into the Q&A function as the talk goes on. Now, please join me in welcoming Professor Raj Pandey for this year's Meiji Jingu Autumn Lecture.
I'd like to begin, first of all, by thanking Meiji Jingu Cultural Institute and Mr. Sato for your very generous support in inviting me to give this lecture and for consistently supporting Japanese studies at SOAS. Thank you to JRC for inviting me to give this talk. And what can I say about Fabio? Thank you for your generous introduction and for that masterful rendition of Manyoshu. I almost feel like you should be taking the podium and talking about this topic. But thank you. So as you can see from the title, in this lecture, I'm going to address a rather unusual theme. And as Fabio pointed out, this is the subject of my forthcoming book. But I'd like to begin by explaining briefly how I came to work on this project. In my previous book, I explored conceptions of the body, gender, and desire in medieval Japanese literary and Buddhist texts. In the course of my research, I encountered many narratives in which feces, urine, and farts figured as vibrant entities whose materiality was vividly captured through an appeal to the senses. Runny diarrhea brought alive through onomatopoeic sounds, foul emissions and vile smells rendered palpable through descriptions of people holding their noses, and lively scenes of farting, vomiting, and defecating, graphically illustrated in visual scrolls. And of course, this material world was not seen as separate from its significatory functions. So it was accorded many different meanings within medieval Japanese texts, eliciting a wide range of responses, ranging from disgust and anxiety to compassion, laughter, and pleasure. And yet this rich archive, I discovered, had been pretty much sidelined in academic discourse. This absence was the starting point of my inquiry. I should point out that scholars of medieval Japan have studied the material aspects of excrement and conducted research to attempt to establish when excrement and urine came to be used as fertilizer, what the toilet habits of people were at the time, and so on. And as you can see, this is often used in order to substantiate the claim that for most common people, this activity took place outdoors communally. However, these same scholars have shown little interest in exploring the symbolic significance of excrement in the religious and literary texts of the period. And so to my knowledge, there's no serious monograph, either in Japanese or indeed in any other language, that specifically addresses this theme. We live in an age in which there's an almost obsessive interest in food. In inverse proportion to the endless thematization of what we ingest is our reluctance to pay attention to the material and cultural significance of what we eject. A conspicuous feature of our modern age has been the degree to which we have consigned the most fundamental of bodily excretions, feces, to invisibility. These are now activities to be performed behind closed doors in the utmost privacy. The place where we do so has also come to be metonymically linked to the act itself, and hence we cannot refer to it directly, preferring instead euphemisms such as the powder room, which has perhaps gone out of style, but restroom, washroom, bathroom, and the like. Talking about one's bowel movements in polite society is virtually taboo and certainly not a good topic at the dinner table. We cannot underestimate the freud imprint of Freud and psychoanalytic theory in shaping modern attitudes to feces. As is well known in Freud's psychosexual theory of human development, the anal stage in the life of a child is antecedent to genital sex, because at this juncture it is the anus that serves as the site of autoerotic pleasure. The sublimation of anality is necessary in order to reach normal adulthood. So I'm not going to labor this point, but my basic contention is that Freudian terms like repression, the unconscious, anal retention, and so forth have so thoroughly suffused our everyday vocabulary that it is virtually impossible to think about sex or indeed excrement outside of these categories. And to that extent, we in the West today are psychological men and women, shaped by structures of thought and feeling that derive in large measure from the works of Freud and his disciples. For all its universalist claims, the real question is, how well does psychoanalytic theory and the many concepts that it has spawned help us to understand the world of medieval Japan? Because it should be immediately apparent that a wide distance separates medieval Japan from the modern West and indeed from contemporary Japan itself. Defecating in this period was not a private matter. It often took place outdoors and in the company of others, and the malodors of excrement were familiar and all-pervasive. This meant that medieval men and women were intimately connected to their bodies and its excretions in a way unimaginable to their modern counterparts. This proximity to shit did not make them akin to children, yet to reach full adulthood, a stage finally arrived at with the advent of modern man, as Freudian readings would lead us to believe. So it's hardly surprising then that the significations that they assigned to fecal matter were ones that will seem alien to us. Exploring their modes of making sense of excrement, I suggest, provides us with unexpected insights into the medieval Japanese imaginary, whilst at the same time revealing the contingent and provincial nature of our own modes of thinking. In what follows, I would like to introduce you to the myriad ways in which excrement was put to work in a wide range of narratives, from Buddhist canonical writings and popular tale literature, Setsuwa, to monogatari, romance narratives, and of course, picture scrolls, emaki. So let me begin by considering the different significations assigned to excrement in Buddhist texts. Its presence as a motif in sutras and in the commentarial literature of India, China, and Japan served a specific pedagogical function, namely to illustrate the the essentially foul nature of the human body, fujo. The core feelings of disgust and revulsion produced by excrement made it a fitting site for highlighting the problem of desire and for illuminating the deluded nature of all attachment. and to understand the transient nature of the self and the body. The body or self was conceived of and portrayed as being little more than a bag filled with noxious substances such as pus, vomit, blood, worms, and shit, constantly subject to change and deterioration, thereby, as I said, highlighting its insubstantial nature. In the Chinese translation of the Mahaprajna Paramita Padosha, gosh, bad pronunciation, by Kumarajiva, we have, or Daichi Doron in Japanese, we have vivid descriptions of the intrinsic foulness of the body from conception to birth to eventual death. It describes in vivid detail how the body at birth is filled with feces, urine, pus, blood, fat, entrails, and worms, and of course the many stages of decomposition that the body goes through after death. So the religious commentaries composed in Japan, which refer to the theme of fujo or impurity, closely follow these scriptural texts and commentaries, the most famous of which is the Ojo Yoshu, of course, the Essentials of Salvation by the Tendai monk Genshin, who draws on the doctrinal treatise Mohoshikan or Makashikan to write, and I quote, "It says in Makashikan, until one has grasped this aspect, namely impurity, one's feelings of lust and attachment are extremely strong. But when one apprehends this truth, then all desire ceases. It is like a person who, not having seen feces, an unbearable sight, eats food, but once they have inhaled the foul stench of excrement, ends up vomiting and can no longer eat." End of quote. And of course, you know, these quotes from Makashikan travel across the whole range of Setsuwa literature. So, for example, in Kamono Chomei's Hoshinshu, he has a similar passage. You know, there are many such instances. Genshin presents a graphic description of the suffering experienced in the 6 realms of existence, Rokudo, the hells, the world of hungry ghosts, the domain of warriors turned demons, the animal realm, the human realm, and the realm of celestial beings. And of course, he has an elaborate taxonomy of the various hells into which humans can fall for evil acts performed in previous lives. Revival hell is sort of interesting for our purposes because it's divided into 16 subsidiary hells, and one of them is the region of the mud of excrement. And I quote from the text itself, "This region brims with hot mud. This region brims with hot mud of excrement and is overrun with insects with snouts as hard as diamonds. These insects swarm around the hell dweller as he gouges on excrement and attacks him, tearing his skin and eating his flesh or breaking open his bones and sucking his marrow. People who killed deer and birds in the past fall here." End of quote. And that this is an illustration from Jigoku Zoshi, the Health Scrolls. So in what follows, I want to consider the connections between excrement and the way in which it is linked to humans, to animals, and to the world of hungry ghosts. So I'll start with the world of humans. And I'm going to focus on the hand scroll of diseases and deformities, Yamai no Soshi, another scroll which was, I guess, completed sometime in the 12th century. This work is now recognized along with the scrolls depicting the 6 realms of existence, the Rokudoe, as a Buddhist work, which illustrates the misery and suffering caused by illnesses and other afflictions in the realm of humans, Jindo. There's this close connection between Yamai no Soshi and the last chapter of Shobo Nenjo Gyo, the sutra, for the proper vows for the true dharma. I'm not going to give you the provenance and details of this sutra, but the scroll sometimes follows the content of the sutra closely and on occasion creatively adapts the source text to capture visually and through accompanying text the specific historical and geographical context within which the actions and emotions of the ill and deformed, as well as those around them, unfolds. The scroll draws our attention to the juxtapositions between the rich and the poor, the healthy and the ill, presenting a picture of both the physical and emotional dimensions of the human condition. Ailments associated with anal deformities and uncontrollable excretions figure in both Shogun and Jogyo and the visual scroll. We encounter a man who, lacking an anus, spews excrement from his mouth. In another scene, a man with anal fistulas sprays excrement out of multiple anuses. I should have given it whatever you meant to give, aren't you? A trigger warning for. Okay. The visual depiction of a woman suffering from cholera, kakuran, is accompanied by explanatory comments, kotobagaki, which follow the sutra closely in its descriptions of the symptoms of her illness. And I quote, "There is an affliction called kakuran, which produces stabbing pain in the stomach. One vomits from the mouth and leaks diarrhea from the backside. One lies prostrate in convulsions." End of quote. However, the final comment about the condition being truly unbearable, makoto ni taegatashi, suggests a certain degree of compassion and concern for the woman, which is entirely absent from the sutra. The sutra merely notes that the woman is unable to eat or drink. This is not mentioned in the Kotobagaki of Yamai no Soshi, but what I'd like us to think about is the way in which it forms the basis of a more complex visual rendition of the various activities and psychological reactions of those surrounding her. We see an old nun helping her as she vomits, while another woman brings her a bowl of what could be food or medicine. We see a dog consuming the diarrhea that spurts out of her anus, while on the other side of the picture, a contented-looking mother prepares food or medicine while her child crawls beside her. Excrement in Yamai no Soshi functions as a particularly graphic illustration of the workings of karmic retribution. The dog who belongs to a lower level of existence than that of humans is reduced to eating human feces. Humans too, as a consequence of past actions, experience pain and suffering as they succumb to horrific diseases. The scroll captures the full gamut of human emotions and responses. I haven't shown you all of them, but those of you who are familiar with this scroll will recall that you have onlookers who are laughing at people's various adversities. There's one of a person with both male and female genitalia, and you've got two men peeping into the room and giggling. So there's enormous variety in the kinds of responses that this particular scroll elicits. And therefore, I would say that it covers the full gamut of human emotions and responses, ranging from disgust, contempt, and indifference to kindness and care towards those whose body emit foul substances, such as vomit, and excrement. And I guess it's to this aspect of the function of excrement that I would like to draw our attention. While undoubtedly excrement was a powerful metaphor for the foul and evanescent nature of the body, in the Buddhist discursive tradition, excrement was not consistently coded purely in negative terms. Imbued with the power to arouse compassion, it could work as a positive force, thereby ensuring the salvation not only of those who were tainted by their association with it, but also of those who performed selfless deeds on their behalf. In Setsuwa literature, there are several stories where the painful consequences of performing evil deeds are captured through excremental imagery. And I'm drawing here on a collection of tales called Konjaku Monogatari Shu, a collection of tales of times now past, compiled in the medieval period. There are many stories, but one of them describes the wife of a wealthy man who falls pregnant, whereupon her body becomes polluted, emitting a foul odor. She gives birth to a baby boy who is covered in excrement and urine. He has a hideously emaciated body and grows up to feed only on shit, for which he is shunned by all. What is noteworthy here is that he's saved from his abject state by the Buddha, who shows him compassion and converts him to the Dharma. His compulsion to eat shit is cured and he attains enlightenment. And as I say, in all these stories, compassion is the dominant mode through which the abject nature of excrement, and by extension, all those who are associated with it, is transformed, ensuring an end to pain and suffering, and pointing the way to the Buddhist path. And as we will proceed to see, compassion is extended not only to humans, but also to animals and hungry ghosts. The degree of suffering experienced in the different hells was undoubtedly more severe than the pain meted out to those who lived in the world of humans. These distinctions mattered. However, transmigration across different realms necessarily meant that the boundaries between the different worlds were porous. Humans, animals, and hungry ghosts were caught in a cycle of interchangeability when one category of being could be transformed into another, depending on the crimes and good deeds committed in previous lives. So in the popular didactic tradition, people who are truly enlightened are singled out for their ability to recognize the profound karmic connection between the human and animal worlds. Again, a story from the Konjaku Monogatari. The holy man Jakushin's intuitive grasp of this hidden truth is illustrated through accounts of the extraordinary sensitivity and kindness he displays towards animals. In one vignette, we are told that whilst he's living in a place called Iwakura, he suffers from a bad case of diarrhea caused by a cold. When he goes to the latrine, the priest in the next room hears him defecating. And this is a standard description. The sound is like water gushing out of a basin. Such is the terrible state of his bowels. Peeping through a hole in the wall of the latrine, the priest sees an old dog who is waiting for Jakushin to get up and leave so that he can eat his feces. Jakushin talks to the dog, saying, and I quote, or perhaps I shall paraphrase because it's rather long. Initially, he berates the dog, says that you've committed all kinds of terrible crimes in previous lives and you made people eat foul substances and you were greedy, you were not filial to your parents and so forth, and that's why you received birth as an animal. And that's why you find yourself eating these foul and impure substances. But then he changes register and says, I'm ashamed to offer such a foul matter to one who over many previous lives was my parent. Because of my cold, what I have defecated is watery and inedible. Tomorrow I will cook a delicious meal for you, and you can eat to your heart's content. Weeping copiously, as enlightened monks seem to do in these narratives, he leaves and, as promised, prepares rice and some accompanying dishes, which he serves to the old dog. So what distinguishes the Buddha and the enlightened men for whom he serves as a model is that they can see the interconnections between the different realms of existence, and that for them, feces serve as the means for transforming revulsion into compassion and care. So now I'd like to turn, finally, we've done humans and animals, we'll look at hungry ghosts, or gaki. While the presence of animals in the human world was a readily observed reality, creatures such as gaki were envisaged as being no less real in the medieval Japanese imaginary. These creatures were seen as living presences who traveled from the gaki realm to cohabit with humans in theirs. Luckily, we have two 12th century scrolls of hungry ghosts, the Komoto scroll and the Sogenji scroll, and they present us with graphic images of gaki as grotesque skeletal figures with enormous bellies and needle-thin throats who wander about restlessly in search of water, fire, bodily emissions such as excrement, urine, mucus, postpartum blood, and what our body becomes after death, decomposed flesh, sinews, and bones. There, and you saw that in the very first, right? There are all these gaki who have gathered. Theirs is a hunger and thirst that is insatiable, a condition to which they are condemned as punishment for greed in previous lives. Now, again, these scrolls, as with the scroll of diseases and deformities, draws heavily on the same sutra, Shobon Nenjogyo, while at the same time recontextualizing, amplifying, and reinterpreting the source text. A striking feature of the Sogenji scroll is that gaki are not depicted as evil creatures who deserve punishment. What is foregrounded is their suffering, which is depicted in a manner that arouses human compassion. For example, a scene in the scroll depicts a Buddhist festival, likely the Urabon-e, in which offerings of food and water are made by men and women to the spirits of the dead. Here, the focus, this is a festival to ease the suffering of hungry ghosts, Segaki, who are recognized as being deceased parents fallen into the Gaki realm for evil deeds performed in previous lives. The performance of these rituals signals a shift from the Gaki's transgressions to the importance of compassionate deeds that hold out the reassuring prospect of salvation. In another scene, a Gaki who breathes out flames from its mouth is taught an incantation by the Buddha's disciple Ananda, which brings about its salvation. So far from being incommensurably other, Gaki were integrated into the very fabric of medieval life. With their large bellies, needle-thin throats, emaciated bodies, and red hair, all well-recognized signs of starvation, they were not unlike the starving beggars of medieval towns and cities who were at once seen as pariahs and at the same time accepted as integral parts of the community. The pitifully endearing depictions of Gaki, this is Barbara Ruch's rather nice term, the pitifully endearing depictions of Gaki were designed to arouse both fear and compassion. In this way, I would suggest that both excrement and Gaki functioned as a kind of skillful means, upaya or hoben, a generative force that both alerted humans to the laws of retribution, while at the same time arousing in them compassion towards those who were suffering, thereby ensuring their own salvation as well as those of the Gaki. A notable feature of the conceptual world of medieval Japanese Buddhism was a style of argumentation whereby seemingly contradictory ideas could be debated and resolved by drawing on different doctrinal strands that were internal to Buddhist discourse. The extraordinarily capacious nature of medieval Buddhist thought opened up a wide range of hermeneutic possibilities, making possible the accommodation of widely divergent positions on excrement within its framework. Outcasts, hinin, for example, were seen as having highly compromised and polluted bodies, which were believed to be hindrances to their attainment of salvation. The lowly births to which they were condemned were justified on the grounds that it was retribution for their past misdeeds. At the same time, these outcasts could be saved despite their transgressions by those who showed them compassion. And in more radical formulations, they themselves were celebrated as manifestations of bodhisattvas or enlightened beings who ensured the salvation of others. This meant that the conventional oppositions between the foul and the pure, the deluded and enlightened, were rendered unstable, allowing for all phenomena and activities, however insignificant or lowly, to be reclaimed as belonging to the undifferentiated, non-dual realm. And I'll just give one example from the writings of and activities of the monk Aeson, for example, who promoted charitable works on behalf of lepers, beggars, and other outcasts, and linked their activities to the cult of the Bodhisattva Manjushri. On the one hand, these hinin or outcasts, who were associated with the Buddhist category of ichantikas, or those who lacked the inherent qualities that were essential to the attainment of enlightenment, were seen as deserving of their lowly birth. At the same time, outcasts could manifest themselves as living incarnations of Manjushri, who had taken the form of the lowliest of beings in order to save people, regardless of their status, by arousing compassion and faith in them. And this is a popular topos, right? We have so many examples, like, in the Onsenji Engi, for example, the origins of Onsenji, for example, the holy man Gyoki is asked by a leper to lick his suffering and diseased body, and he does so. And of course, immediately the leper reveals himself to be the Yakushin Nyorai, who has taken this form to test. Empress Komyo, there are many such examples where she has to suck the pus of leprous, a leper and so forth. So this interplay of what David, and I could give you maybe in Q&A, but other examples to substantiate this point. This is the same style of argument that is used for talking about yujo or asobi, courtesans. The same style. They are mired in, sin because of their sexual activities, but in fact, they can reveal themselves to be Fugen, or, and so forth. So the interplay of what David Bylock has called dual and non-dual logistics is at the heart of medieval Buddhist modes of thinking. This meant that excrement could be seen both as a material manifestation of the foul and abject, as well as the very means through which these binary categories could be called into question. Meaning and function were always dependent on context, producing a multiplicity of possibilities that resisted the emergence of a stable and unitary discourse on excrement. The many stories about the eccentric holy man Zoga, which proliferated in the medieval period, for example, all designed to show how he overturns conventional social boundaries, pure and impure, high and low, sacred and worldly. And in a way, they're designed to demonstrate that these distinctions have no meaning for someone who has transcended worldly concerns and apprehended the non-dual realm. So one of his most outrageous activities is, which is recounted in both Konjaku Monogatari and in Uji Shui Monogatari, is that when he is invited to a very solemn ceremony to perform the tonsorial ritual for the Sanjo Empress, he does so, but then proceeds to go into the precincts of the imperial palace and defecate in public there, and creating a terrible outcry. So, to recapitulate, thus far I have argued that excrement in Buddhist narratives served as a pliant and malleable signifier. It served as a potent metaphor for the foul and ephemeral nature of the body and all worldly phenomena. It was a graphic illustration of the inexorable laws of karma. At the same time, it could work as a positive force because it could arouse compassion. And in more radical formulations, it could be harnessed to call into question the very binaries of pure, impure, deluded attachment versus enlightenment. Excrement, you'll be relieved to learn, was not used only to talk about serious issues relating to the nature of attachment, retribution, and salvation. It was also a propitious site for generating laughter. And it's to these humorous tales that I would now like to turn. Scholars working on medieval Japanese texts who have sought, to the extent that they've addressed these questions, when they've sought to analyze the meaning and function of sex, excrement, farts, and the like, have drawn on Mikhail Bakhtin's conceptual framework, using terms such as carnival and the grotesque body to do so. As will be immediately apparent, these concepts are born of a very specific Christian tradition. In Bakhtin's account of carnival, he describes it as, and I quote, the people's second life, organized around laughter and the celebration of the body. Carnival encapsulated a view of the world from below, an inversion of hierarchy through a world turned upside down. While there were two clearly demarcated spheres, the official world of the church and that of the common people, at specific times of the year, the people were allowed to assert themselves temporarily by overturning the highly structured and sanctioned holy rituals of the church. Central to carnivalesque laughter, in his view, was the celebration of the grotesque body, which privileged the nether regions with its oozing orifices and openings. As Stallybrass and White put it, and I'll quote, "The carnivalesque body was an image of impure corporeal bulk with its orifices, mouth flared, nostrils, anus, yawning wide, and its lower regions, belly, legs, feet, buttocks, and genitals, given priority over the upper regions, head, spirit, reason." End of quote. The foregrounding of the grotesque body and its excretory functions in order to turn all that was official and authorized on its head was a feature of carnivalesque writing across a wide range of genre in the medieval European repertoire. And again, my question is, how well do these terms travel when applied to texts that emerged out of very different religious and cultural tradition? In the medieval world shaped by Japanese Buddhism, the body's nether regions were not constructed as the grotesque, degraded, and vilified other of a superior spiritual domain. The hierarchy between the upper and bodily realms was recognized, but it did not become the overarching framework through which to think through questions that were at the heart of Buddhist discourse and practice. Buddhist texts recognized the dangers of sexual attachment, and it used excrement as a metaphor for the foul and impermanent nature of the body. Unlike in the Christian tradition, however, the lower bodily realm was not systematically reviled as the locus of evil or sin and subjected to systematic denigration or sustained diatribes. Equally, while the sexual organs and excrement were often used to produce laughter in medieval Japanese texts, these playful games did not engage in systematic inversions of the kind that we find in carnivalesque writing. The lower bodily realm was not mobilized to serve as the outrageous counterpart of an officially sanctioned world. The insulting invitations to kiss my ass or the practice of baring one's buttocks as a gesture of defiance or insult, both common practices in medieval Europe and ones that continue to this day, carry a transgressive charge precisely because of the lowly status accorded to the body's nether regions. It is surely not surprising that given the altogether different understanding of the body in medieval Japan, such forms of abuse were conspicuously absent in the texts and daily practices of the medieval period in Japan. So it seems to me that the grotesque body in Carnival, this is a long-winded way of saying that they will not do us a great deal of service if we are to try and think through these texts. But perhaps somebody may wish to challenge that in interesting ways. So how then to read these tales of laughter? I suggest that parody is a useful concept for an analysis of some of these narratives, as long as it is sufficiently modified such that it doesn't carry all the baggage that Carnival and transgression does. That parody is often linked to Carnival and transgression is evident in the writings of Linda Hutcheon, the leading authority on parody, who argues that a parodic text is transgressive, even if, and I quote, as in Carnival, it can do so only temporarily and only within the confines dictated by recognizability, end of quote. I think it's perhaps more useful to think of what Tsvetana Kristeva has to say about parody, where she argues that a parodic text in the Japanese tradition does not necessarily seek to ridicule, satirize, or criticize the authoritative or canonical text that serves as its point of reference. Many medieval Giko monogatari, or imitations of classical tales, and other Edo writings that were modeled on the tale of Genji, for example, In these works, parodic works, they assumed that the readers had knowledge of the canonical text to which they alluded. In this way, the Genji, in fact, was brought to a wider audience and enhanced its popularity, contributing to the continuity of the Japanese literary tradition. And I think I concur with her analysis that parody was not mobilized in order to transgress the normative order. And if that is the case, what work is parody doing in these texts? And I suggest that it is best understood as a form of literary play that afforded a literate audience which was knowledgeable and appreciative of both the parodic and parodied texts, the opportunity to partake of the sophisticated games that were being played in the discursive domain. The parodic effects that were produced operated primarily at the level of the textual. They were not so much about offering a critique of prevailing social structures or of the text that served as their point of reference. Rather, they were about the pleasure afforded by recognizing the incongruities and absurdities that were produced through the inappropriate melange of different narrative styles, themes, generic codes, and so forth. So, for example, the mixing of courtly, ga, and plebeian, zoku, motifs, as we shall see, was a common practice across a wide range of genre, including monogatari, which we often think of, the highest form. And so two of these courtly texts, Ochikubo Monogatari and Heichu Monogatari, both, have interesting narratives in which excrement figures. But in the interest of time, I'll restrict myself to Heichu Monogatari. So we can see the emergence of the topos of the parodic figure of the ideal lover or irogonomi in this 10th century text called Heichu Monogatari. So in this text, what we have, I guess, are the beginnings of Heichu as a parodic figure. We find that his attempts at amorous dalliance come to naught, either because he fails to apply himself single-mindedly to winning the affections of the woman he desires, or because he gives up, or because they treat him with indifference. So he already emerges as a sort of clownish figure in Heichu Monogatari, and then he appears 2 or 3 times in the Tale of Genji as a kind of foil to Hikaru Genji. But it's really in the Setsuwa collections like Konjaku Monogatari and Ujishuri Monogatari that he becomes the subject of full-blown parody. And the parodic effects are created by the shocking association of the figure of the courtly lover with human excrement. So this is the tale I will narrate. Go ahead. Sorry. An RS, rather. Thank you. So, here's the story. The narrative begins in courtly mode. So it describes Heichu as a man of splendid bearing and appearance, with a very pleasing demeanor and manner of speech. He dallies, as I suppose one should, with the wives and daughters of courtiers, not to mention the ladies in waiting at court. He is taken with the lady in waiting, Jiju no Kimi, who works at the, who's in the service of the minister of the left. Like the heroine of any proper romance, she has a wondrous form and appearance and endowed with a charming disposition. After a series of setbacks, Heichu renews his efforts to form a liaison with her. He turns up on a rainy night. And again, those of you who are familiar with the topos of the rainy night in these romance narratives will know that nothing else conveys the seriousness of one's intent as turning up on a rainy night. So he is allowed to, she doesn't turn him away. When he opens the latch to her inner chamber, he wonders whether this is all a dream, and he cannot help but tremble with joy and anticipation. When he enters the room, he finds the place suffused with the alluring scent of incense. As he gropes about in the dark, he senses the presence of a recumbent woman clad in a single robe. He recognizes the slenderness of her head and shoulders and feels the coolness of her hair, akin to strands of ice. This is a standard feature of beauty of hair. Heichu is beside himself with joy and finds himself trembling again and unable to speak. And just when he thinks it's all going to work out, she suddenly jumps up and announces that she has left the inner sliding door open and she needs to lock it. And with that, she leaves, and he realizes that he's been deceived once again. It is at this juncture that the narrative takes a turn, subverting the conventions of the monogatari form. Wanting to discover something unseemly about her which would serve to cure him of his infatuation, Heichu hits upon the idea of examining Jiju's chamber pot. Seeing her stools, he is convinced, will produce in him a sense of disgust and revulsion that will help him overcome his attachment to her. So he waits for the maid to come out with the chamber pot, grabs it from her, and locks himself in a room. Now in possession of the chamber pot, he is taken by its extraordinary beauty. The chamber pot, yes. It is decorated and coated with golden lacquer. This all serves a purpose, as you will see. It is decorated and coated with golden lacquer, and its outward appearance is of such incomparable beauty that he cannot bring himself to open it and have his feelings of disgust aroused. However, after a while, as he fearfully lifts the lid, he is hit by the fragrance of cloves. When he looks inside, he sees that the pot is filled with a light yellowish fluid and that 3 dark yellow round lumps, a few inches in length, each the size of a thumb, are immersed in it. He thinks he recognizes what they are, but contrary to expectations, they emit an incomparable fragrance. He picks up a stick lying nearby and pokes the lump and brings it to his nose and discovers that it has a wondrous scent. Nonplussed, he reckons that this is not something any ordinary person could produce, and he is driven mad with desire for her. Drawing the pot to him, he takes a sip of the liquid, which is suffused with the aroma of cloves. Licking the lump at the end of the stick, he finds that it has a bitter-sweet taste and that it is incomparably fragrant. But Heichu is a quick-witted fellow, and he understands what the lady has done. He marvels at the fact that she has anticipated his scheme to look inside her chamber pot and that she has worked out her artful substitutions extremely cleverly. He concludes that he cannot live without having her, and in the end he falls ill, and suffering from frustrated love passes away. And of course, Konjaku Monogatari gives us a Buddhist moral at the end. One must not be so ridiculously attached to steeped in desire. But that didactic ending notwithstanding, this humorous tale, the pleasure of this humorous tale lies in the ways in which it artfully combines themes and motifs drawn from different genres. And below, that's what I would like to talk about these intertextual conversations that are going on here in this extremely simple narrative. So first of all, the topos of Fujokan, which is meditating on the impurity of the body. This was a standard practice, and it appears in any number of Buddhist texts. And it's mobilized in order to warn against the dangers of being attached to the body, which is seen as the site of love and desire. So people go to the burial grounds, right? And observe how many stages, Lucia? 12. 9, oops, 9 stages of bodily decomposition in order to rid themselves of desire. And of course, in popular didactic Setsuwa tales, we often encounter a nobleman who is inconsolable after the death of a wife or lover. But when confronted by her decaying corpse, he sits there for long enough that this happens, he manages to overcome his excessive attachment to her. He apprehends the truth of the evanescence of the phenomenal world, and he renounces worldly life and becomes a monk. And these tales of taking the tonsure after experiencing heartbreak, they're called Hiren Tonse Tan. So there's a special category of these, of these tales. And they serve as the backdrop for the playful inversions that propel the Heichu story in Konjaku Monogatari. Heichu seeks to cure himself of his desire for the beautiful Jiju no Kimi by viewing her feces, which, as we have seen, were used as metaphors for the intrinsic foulness and impurity of the human body. The elaborate descriptions of the beauty of the chamber pot, therefore, are not gratuitous. They seek to stretch in comical ways the contrast between outward beauty and inner foulness, whereby fecal matter serves as a metonym for the intrinsic impurity of the body and the chamber pot for Jiju's alluring outward form. Her substitution of excrement with fragrant substances is another instance of the tale's engagement in intertextual conversations, which takes the form of elusive play on the genre of ojo-den, or biographies of holy men and women who attain birth in the Pure Land. These hagiographical accounts depict exceptional figures whose deep faith and commitment to reciting the Nembutsu means that their bodies defy the laws of decomposition and exude fragrances even after death. Jiju is, of course, a far cry from a holy figure. In a parodic inversion of Ojo-den, Jiju emerges as someone who has complete mastery of the game of love, and it is through her acuity in anticipating Heichu's moves, rather than through religious practice, that she is able to perform a seemingly miraculous deed, turning urine and excrement into fragrant and flavorful substances. Unlike in the tales of renunciation, in which lovers apprehend the illusory nature of female beauty and take the tonsure, in this narrative, Heichu finds that drinking and eating the contents of her chamber pot, literally consuming her, fuels his obsessive desire for her. Far from leading him to renounce worldly life, he is even more mired in sinful attachment, which results in his illness and eventual death. Ujishuri Monogatari has a version of the same story without the Buddhist ending. It merely says he's very cross. He says, I can't believe it. I'm such a wonderful Irogonomi. How did this happen to me? So I would suggest that Heichu Monogatari is not a critique of the figure of the ideal lover. Its aim is not to undermine the protocols that govern forms of courtship and amorous play. neither particularly shocking, maybe shocking, but certainly not subversive. Excrement here is mobilized in order to produce a kind of knowing laughter shared by readers who are in on the literary game. And we see the same strategy at work in another tale in Ujishuri Monogatari. How much time do we have?
few more minutes.
Oops. Oh no. Shall I skip a story or two?
I'm afraid so, yes.
All right. Well, anyway, there's another story which does something very similar. Let me just conclude with two stories very briefly from Kokoncho Monju, beautifully translated and shared with me by the late Tom Harper. And so I want to, do this. I included them because I wanted to mention my deep gratitude to him. So an accomplished calligrapher who's known as Do Nothing, Chirio Byo, he's asked to copy the Kokinshu, the Imperial Anthology of Poetry. He's given some paper, the patron finds he does absolutely nothing, so he goes to find out, and Chiriobio explains that he was stricken with a dreadful attack of diarrhea, and having run out of paper, he used all the paper that was given to him to copy the Kokinshu. Paper is very expensive to start with. And so the patron is at a loss for words and says, can I have at least my Kokinshu back? And he says, well, that's just it. I used the paper to wipe up the mess. What am I to do? And it concludes with the comment, for someone they call Do Nothing, what this fellow did was really something. In another story, the last one, a lady in waiting who's having a secret affair with a monk has him visit every night. One evening he needs to pee, and so he asks her where he can find the hole in the floor into which, I didn't know that this was a practice, but anyway, where he's meant to urinate. After she explains where it is located, he manages to find the right spot, but just as he's about to pee, he feels a fart coming on. So these are all translated by Tom, by the way. So he holds back and tries not to do both at the same time. The lady, surmising that he has been unable to find the hole, approaches him, groping in the dark. Her hand lands upon his armpit. As he's a ticklish fellow, both his fart and pee come out together. And I quote from the translation, his little devil, which had been aimed squarely through the hole, jerked out. Pee sprayed wildly all over the place. End of quote. Not enough. There's a partition to the room next door where another lady in waiting is sleeping. The piss lands on her, straight on her face. She creates a commotion, believing that the roof is leaking and that rain has come through. The narrator remarks, what a hilarious scene that must have been. And it seems to me that there are many such hilarious stories that are very lighthearted in spirit and perhaps best enjoyed when they are not burdened with a weight of analysis which they sometimes cannot bear. And I wish I could tell you more, but with that, I will bring this talk to a close.
Thank you very much. That was frankly revolting. Very much probably following the intention.